Before I get into this episode, I want to say a massive thank you to a couple of people who have left reviews on Apple Podcasts. You too can leave a review. All you need to do is go to Apple Podcasts, look for the section that says leave a rating and review, and pop some words in there. Really appreciate it, and it helps us to grow the show in the way that you, the listener, wants it to be. Starting off on March the 2nd, Ilesby said, "A podcast that really makes you stop and think. I find this content very valuable." Thank you so much, Isles. And also Chucharu345, who left 5 stars and said, "The best. There is literally no one better." Thank you guys so much for your ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. And again, if you too would like to leave me a review for the show, I'd really appreciate it. Go to Apple Podcasts, scroll down to the bit that says leave a rating and review, and pop your words. Whether you're planning it or you're already doing it, you'll know that your company needs its own podcast. That's why you listen to a podcast about podcasting. Not only do you feel it in your bones, but you've done the research, you've made the case to your stakeholders, you've probably put together a pitch deck more than once that took you way longer than it should have done because you were constantly distracted by memes on the internet while you're putting it together. And then someone in a meeting at some point, probably the person that still thinks LinkedIn is just for job hunters, said those immortal words that make every marketer absolutely f***ing die inside. But how we know it's working? And just like that, you're back to square one. This episode is for you. If you've had to fight that fight, because the reason you're losing it isn't because the podcast is a bad idea. It absolutely isn't. It's because you're making the wrong arguments for it. Welcome to B2B Podcasting Insights with me, Neal Veglio, the founder of Podknows Podcasting. We're a podcast agency helping you get better results from your branded podcast. You will notice I have changed the intro because I really hated the previous one. I digress. Let's be honest about what's actually happening when stakeholders push back on a branded podcast that you or your business is creating. It's rarely about the podcast itself. Nobody in the boardroom is thinking, do you know what, I genuinely hate audio and video content as a medium. What they're thinking is, this sounds expensive. I don't understand how we'd measure that. And if it bombs, well, I'm the dingleberry who has to explain that to the board. That's a risk problem, not a content problem. And if you go into that conversation talking about brand awareness and reach and thought leadership, what you're doing is you're pouring petrol directly all over their risk anxiety and handing them the matches to burn it. Here's what not to do when making the case for a podcast within your brand or business. Don't, for the love of everything retention data, walk into a stakeholder meeting with download projections. Downloads mean very little to anybody these days, to be fair, but they certainly mean nothing to a CFO. You might as well tell them that your Instagram post got 47 likes on Sunday. They'll nod politely and then vote it down before the biscuits are even finished. And don't. Please don't. Please, 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 please don't. Open with all the big companies are doing it. That's the marketing equivalent of telling your parents all your mates are jumping off a bridge, and that's why you want to do it. It doesn't usually land for other branded podcast advocates, and it won't be landing for you. So, what does work? I'm glad you asked. Connect the podcast directly to a problem that the business already admits it has. That's your in with the stakeholders. Every company has something in their sales process that they would love to fix. Why wouldn't a business want more sales or quicker sales or more efficient sales? Maybe that sales cycle's too long. Maybe your prospects keep going cold after a great initial chat. You know, Frank gets really excited because he's just got off the call with somebody who is an absolute dead cert for signing in Q3. And then he gets ghosted. Maybe the team's spending half their time on discovery calls re-explaining what the company actually does every single time. See, those aren't content problems, but a podcast can solve them all. And when you frame it that way, not as a content initiative, but as a sales support tool, well, now the conversation with your stakeholders can be a totally different one. Stakeholders do love sales. So if this is familiar sounding, we lose deals at the proposal stage because prospects aren't warm enough. Well, there's your in. That's a problem the podcast can help solve. A podcast that pre-educates those prospects, that answers their objections before they even get on a call with your executives. That makes the salesperson's job 3 times easier. So then it's no longer a marketing expense, it's an actual sales investment. And that sounds very different to the person holding the purse strings. The language matters enormously here. I've seen it before. I've consulted with so many businesses, both local, regional, and even national and international. And they all view this the same way. If you're telling somebody that this is going to add to their bottom line, not take from it, it's a far more exciting idea. So stop calling it content and start calling it your sales asset. Content absolutely sounds like cost. It's cost of time, it's cost of production. Sometimes it can even be cost of shame for some. But a sales asset absolutely sounds like leverage. It is the same thing, dressed differently, but one of those is going to get budget signed off, and one of them gets sent to a subcommittee where it's just going to get shot down. Now, if you're working inside an organization where the blocker isn't a specific person, but maybe a general fog of skepticism, we should probably talk about that. I've seen it before. Nobody's actively against the idea, but nobody in the business is actively championing it either. And in that situation, you're probably going to want a pilot. What does that mean? Well, don't ask for a year-long commitment. Don't ask for the full production budget. Ask for maybe 6 episodes and a clear set of KPIs tied to a business outcome that you've already agreed on, and a review at the end of that. Most stakeholders will say yes to that because 6 episodes feels containable. It feels reversible. It's low commitment. And here's the thing. 6 good episodes built around actual buying triggers rather than vague topics will do more to convince skeptics than any PowerPoint deck you've ever made in your life. So let the work make the argument. And if you're worried about the idea of getting results from 6 episodes, then you probably need to talk to me, because you need a strategy for making that work. Trust me, the spray and pray does not work. If you just stick 6 episodes out onto the internet and hope your ideal buyers or potential leads are just going to find it and stumble across it, that's quite naive. You definitely need to be intentional about how you're going to get that content discovered. Because we are at the fundamental stage back to the idea of this being content. We're just not going to frame it that way. One more thing on this, and it's quite important. Find your internal champion before you go near that room to ask. There's almost always someone, like a sales director or a head of business development, someone who's been screaming about lead quality for 2 years, who will already get it. They're probably listening to Diary of a CEO on their commute in and out of the office. They understand the value and traction that podcasts can get and what they can offer to a business. Bring them in early and let them co-own the idea with you. Because when it's not just a marketing person saying, we should do a podcast, but the sales director saying, do you know what, this could actually solve our pipeline problem as well. That's when the dynamic shifts in your favor. Stakeholder buy-in is usually more successful when it's presented by a coalition, so build that before you walk through the door. And again, if you need my help in terms of making your stakeholders really take this seriously and understand the value of bringing a branded podcast into your business, talk to me. Get me in your meetings. Trust me, I've been known to turn the coins. Each episode, I share a question I've had from founders and marketers about running a successful B2B podcast, whether through general conversations in my consultancy and in my audits. And some just randomly come in via email. And this is such a case. Hamish runs marketing for a mid-sized professional services firm in Edinburgh, and he wants to know, how often should we actually be publishing? Because we started out weekly and it nearly broke us. Hamish, I feel this in my soul, and I want to reassure you that weekly publishing is not a moral obligation. I myself have slowed cadence. I've gone fortnightly, I've gone monthly, I've even gone quarterly. Needs must. The podcasting industry's done a brilliant job of convincing everyone that consistency means cadence and frequency, and that cadence and frequency just by default means weekly. It really doesn't. Consistency means your audience knows what to expect from you and when. That is it. Consistency can even refer to the content itself. If you're a business podcast, don't suddenly start talking about current affairs. It really is that simple. A podcast that publishes fortnightly and never misses a date is infinitely more credible and more listenable than one that sprints out 12 episodes and then ghosts the listeners for the best part of 3 months because the team's just burned out. For a branded B2B show, fortnightly is genuinely one of my preferred starting cadences for most clients, especially if they're not fully bought in yet or they just don't have the resources to do it. You get to make each episode actually sound good rather than just there, and your team doesn't descend into total resentment every Tuesday. And your listeners, who are busy B2B professionals, not binge listeners, will not feel shortchanged either. So basically, start at a pace that you can sustain. You can always increase the frequency once the system's working, or when your dopamine starts coming through, which it probably will. Going the other way, walking back from weekly because you can't cope, tends to feel like failure, even when it isn't. So do the mindset work on that as well. And make sure that the team doesn't get demoralized when you turn around and say to them, do you know what, guys, we're going to drop this from weekly to fortnightly. Make it clear it is not a failure and it's not a negative. It's more a regrouping. Okay, so this episode's quick tip, and this might upset you. Stop treating episode length like it's a target you got to hit. There's no algorithm rewarding you for reaching 30 minutes. Quite the opposite, in fact. There's certainly no listener out there thinking, oh my God, that was only 18 minutes. I feel completely shortchanged. What listeners actually think when you pad the content and when you recap and when you do all the things where you just say, so to summarize what we've just covered, for the sake of filling another 2 minutes and then repeating everything you just said, what they're thinking is, get on with it. That's not to say that you shouldn't recap, by the way. Definitely recap if it warrants it, but do it for the right reasons. And your episode ends when the point is made. That's it. That's the rule. If you can make the point in 11 minutes, publish 11 minutes. If it needs 47 minutes, fine. But the length should be a consequence of the content, not a decision you made before you even pressed record, which I've seen happen. The podcasts that hold listeners longest aren't the ones with the most content. They're the ones where every minute has earned the next minute in sequence. So next time you're editing, don't ask yourself, is this long enough? Ask yourself, is there a single minute in here that isn't worth it? And then cut whatever can't answer yes. Okay, so back to the point of this episode then. If you're genuinely trying to figure out whether a podcast is the right move for your business and how you can make the case for that internally, the first step is understanding whether what you're currently doing or planning to do actually maps to a real business outcome. And that's exactly what my diagnostic is designed to help you with. It's a single session, one question answered clearly. Is this podcast actually doing a useful job for the business? Or is it just an extra line on the content calendar? If you're interested, go to podknows.co.uk/diagnostic. That's podknows.co.uk/diagnostic. And the link is in the episode description. If you found this useful, pass it on to the person in your organization who keeps saying, maybe we should do a podcast, but hasn't yet worked out how to get everyone else on board with it. Consider this my gift to you. Thanks for listening. I'm Neal Veglio, founder of Podknows Podcasting, and I'll speak to you on the next episode of B2B Podcasting Insights.